Good morning. Tuesday, February 6th. Hello, everybody. Hope you're all doing okay and have gotten yourselves dug out of this snowstorm. I guess we're pretty much staying put for a few days. That said, since we weren't able to do a speech during our last rally, I prepared a few words, which was to commemorate the 2-year anniversary of the Freedom Trucker Convoy to Ottawa of 2022. Almost exactly 2 years ago, hundreds of Canadian truckers drove to Ottawa in protest of government overreach related to COVID mandates. Tens of thousands of other Canadians joined them and remained peacefully in the downtown core of the city for 3 weeks, while crime plummeted and the streets and sidewalks were kept clean of garbage and clear of snow. Food was everywhere and shared with everyone, including the homeless. After 3 weeks of peaceful protesting, and because our Prime Minister did not agree with the protesters' goals, which were basically to end the COVID mandates, he instead decided to invoke the Emergency Act, which gave law enforcement extra powers to do things like remove protesters from the area, violently I might add, and freeze their bank accounts. Now, after everything was pretty much calmed down in Coutts, Alberta, where protesters had the border blocked, 4 Alberta men were arrested on February 13th and 14th of 2022 and charges of mischief over $5,000. Charges of conspiracy to commit murder were soon added. They were dubbed the Coutts 4. Jerry Morin, a lineman, Chris Carbert, a landscaper, Chris Lysak, an electrician, and a gravel truck operator, Anthony Olienick, attended the Coutts, Alberta blockade in support of the Freedom Convoy protest that was going on in Ottawa. At the Public Order Emergency Commission in Ottawa, many government officials testified that the arrest in Coutts underscored the need to declare a national emergency. As stipulated by the Emergency Act, a commission was later called to investigate and to make recommendations. This commission, led by Paul Rouleau, found that the federal government had acted appropriately in invoking the Emergency Act. To date, all 4 have been in custody for almost 2 years now. That's more than 725 days. They have been denied bail. Apparently, their trial date that was set for late May of this year has been moved up to December of 2024. Are they meant to rot behind bars? I thought that Justin Trudeau's policy was to have bail as early as possible, but I guess that is only for real criminals, so they can get released and repeat their crimes over and over and over again. This is how backwards our country is right now. There is law, and then there is justice. And at this juncture, we have neither in Canada. Are the Coutts 4 political prisoners? Denial of bail in Canada is very, very rare, especially since the Trudeau's early release bail policy. People charged with serious crimes routinely get bail. Even people charged with first-degree murder of a police officer have been granted bail. In fact, some bail has been given as early as 2 hours after arrest. This also doesn't sit well with many police who, after all, their job is to arrest people who have committed a crime, no matter how serious it is. Granting bail goes back a very long way to 1166 ruling at the Assize of Clarendon, England's King Henry II established that those charged of crimes had the right to appear in court to defend themselves. This was to prevent those in power making accusations on a whim, depriving citizens of liberty and leaving them to rot in jail. In 1215, the Magna Carta maintained no officer could start proceedings against anyone on the mere say-so of those making accusations. There had to be a speedy trial and trustworthy witnesses who swore an oath. In the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, whether you can call it that these days, in Section 9C, it states that a protected right of Canadian citizens is freedom from arbitrary detention or imprisonment. Section 10C states, everyone has the right on arrest or detention to have the validity of the detention determined by way of habeas corpus and to be released if the detention is not lawful. The Coutts 4 have maintained their innocence, declining plea deal offers. They want to clear their names in court. What are the grounds for denying bail in Canada? On what grounds are the Coutts 4 kept in custody? The primary grounds for typically denying bail in Canada is a flight risk, keeping a prisoner in jail to ensure they appear in court. The Coutts 4 have not been judged to be a flight risk. Secondary grounds for denying bail are when it's deemed necessary for the protection or safety of the public. The Coutts 4 are not held on these grounds. It is on a tertiary grounds that bail is being denied to maintain confidence in the administration of justice. Guidance for denying bail on these grounds include the apparent strength of the prosecution's case, but the Crown has failed so far to provide full disclosure to the Coutts 4 lawyers so they can know what the case against their clients is. On tertiary grounds, judges consider the gravity of the offense. Conspiracy to commit murder is a serious charge, yet the men were unarmed upon arrest. Judges denying bail on tertiary grounds can ask whether a firearm was used. The RCMP displayed a cache of weapons on February 14th of 2022, yet no firearm was used by the Coutts 4. In 2010, case R versus James wrote, denying bail based on tertiary grounds should not arise frequently. Awareness of the presumption of innocence and the prohibition against punishment through pretrial custody before a fair trial are required. Pretrial detention complicates the ability of those accused to prepare a defense. At the POC, it was argued on basis for invoking the 1988 Emergency Act was to restore confidence in government institutions. National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, Jody Thomas, argued protesters questioning the legitimacy of pandemic measures constituted a threat to national security. She alleged protesters were undermining the confidence in public institutions. Those things constitute a threat. However, undermining confidence in public institutions is not identified as one of the triggers for declaring a national emergency in the Emergencies Act. Appeal to confidence in government is echoed in the Coutts 4 being denied bail so the public won't lose trust in the justice system. But denying bail to prevent the public from losing confidence in government is a slippery slope. And mainstream media coverage of the Coutts 4 infers their guilt, even as the law requires presumption of innocence. The Canadian Anti-Hate Network has often been a primary source for news stories, but there are questions about the Canadian Anti-Hate Network's objectivity. Negative public views of the accused are fueled by media stories. Once a media narrative was established about the Coutts 4, the story was buried. We'll only have reasonable, informed, and dispassionate public discussion about this case if media provide fairness and accuracy and exposure. Such reporting might shift perceptions, allowing concern for public loss of confidence in the justice system. Confidence in our justice system suffers when it disregards the Magna Carta. 24 months in a few days, 2 years in jail without bail. It's time for the Coutts 4 to be granted bail. This was mostly an excerpt from Ray McGuinness, a senior fellow with the Frontier Center for Public Policy. Invoking the Emergency Act during the Freedom Convoy was unjustified, unreasonable, and violated the Charter. That's the ruling by Federal Court Judge Richard Mosley. He deserves a huge thank you. The Liberal governments grossly overplayed their hand. Federal Court Judge Richard Mosley arrived at a different conclusion than that of Rouleau. Justice Mosley's conclusion that the Trudeau government's decision does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness, justification, transparency, and intelligibility, and that ultimately there was no national emergency justifying the invocation of the Emergencies Act. What just happened here? Did Trudeau get a spanking from the federal court? Is there really a legal move in the right direction for Canada? The first thing that should be obvious to everyone is that the recent finding by the federal court 2 years after the fact states what was obvious from the day one. Use of the Emergency Act was unreasonable and unjustified. Whether or not it was legal, it was always clearly wrong. As we never been stated enough, legality is not the same thing as morality. The difference between right and wrong. What is for certain is that the federal government will be appealing the recent court ruling, and that Canadians will be paying for it through the government-sanctioned act of theft, commonly called taxes. How much will it end up costing Canadians for the federal government to fight for their legal right to deny Canadians their actual rights? The federal government will fight this ruling until our last dollar. Guaranteed. Even if Mosley's decision is upheld, still very little would stand in the way of any federal government doing the expedient and dealing with the consequences later. Much later, like 2 years later. Speaking of consequences, what is Trudeau and his cabinet even facing? Jail time? Fines? He may not be Prime Minister much longer, as I think the widespread press coverage may be indicating, but with his wealth and special pension, that will just give him more time to go on his lavish luxury vacations, right? Canadians will be footing the bill for the appeal process and stand little to no chance of seeing any actual justice for the harm the government has inflicted through the emergency measures, the years of COVID restrictions, and beyond. Some politicians may get thrown under the bus, but that won't prevent the bus from driving over any one of us that happens to be in its way. One of the central legal arguments for why the Emergency Act was not necessary in 2022 is that most of the conflicts related to the convoy were handled using existing laws, meaning there was no need for special powers. Indeed, there are still four men from Coutts, Alberta, who remain incarcerated since February 2022, awaiting trial without bail. If law enforcement already has the authority to kidnap 4 men who don't appear to have hurt anyone and keep them in cages for 2 years on any ordinary day, under what circumstances would they ever need special powers, right? Speaking about Canadian political prisoners, let's talk about James Sowery, who also went to Coutts, Alberta in 2022 to deliver some firewood. After getting out and talking to the protesters when he was leaving the area, he accidentally ran over a pylon. Due to the very cold weather at the time, the pylon exploded, which was very loud and did scare some people, even the RCMP. However, the RCMP were so scared they accused James of trying to run them over. After 2 years, James was sentenced to 10 months jail time. So don't be thinking this isn't a political scam by our tyrannical dictator Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his Liberal NDP unelected coalition government. It is big time. On the whole, human laws follow human consciousness, not the other way around. Governments tend to take as much power as we let them get away with taking. That's why social engineering to get us thinking like slaves has been a tool even more powerful than lethal weapons for the would-be rulers of this world. The illusion of freedom is much more effective at keeping a population enslaved, and not just because there aren't enough jail cells to hold us all. The more of us who break out of this mental conditioning and see that the emperor truly has no clothes, the less grip the powers that wish they were will have on our lives. Again, I will remind you that these people, these self-proclaimed elitists, globalists, those unelected billionaires who think we are nothing more than useless human eaters who take up space, who should own nothing and be happy about it. They care not for you or me. They care not for humanity. They care not for the planet. They only care about wealth and control. That's it. They want to own everything in the world, everything on the planet, including all its resources, which include you and me. We are nothing but a resource to them. And if they think we are obsolete, they will rid us through all their schemes, like pandemics and climate change, which in all reality are one and the same. Saying no to tyranny, saying no to dictatorship, saying no to those who want to control our every being is the only way out of this nightmare. Do not comply to their authoritarianism, totalitarian collectivism that would make you comply to their every whim for what? Crumbs that fall to the ground. You cannot comply your way to freedom. You cannot comply your way out of enslavement. Just say no. Massive non-compliance is the only answer. Look to Europe right now. They are not taking it anymore, and they have risen up. We must also rise up. Do not comply to your own enslavement. And remember that silence is also a form of compliance. Note that I still believe that with unity plus freedom equals power. We have that power. We just need to realize it and act upon it. I will continue to say, I will not comply. I will never comply. Will you comply? Hoo-ah, fellow freedom fighters and warriors out there. Hoo-ah. And I thank you.